Okay, now we're ready to move to part 4 of the book, page 87, which covers the spelling of the symmetric and pentatonic scales. So the first symmetric scale we're going to look at is the half-step, whole-step, diminished scale. This is on page 88 and 89. This scale is spelled by, if you look at the top of page 88, at that half-step, whole-step built on C, and you look at the intervals underneath the staff, you have a minor second, major second, minor second, major second, minor second, major second, minor second, major second. It just alternates a half step and a whole step between 8 notes. The major scale, the melodic minor, the harmonic minor were 7-note scales. This scale is an 8-note scale, has 8 notes in it. And you'd use this, like built on C, you'd use it against a C7 flat 9 or a C7 sharp 9 chord, or maybe a C7 sharp 11. These may seem like a little bit of a mind bender to learn to spell, but you can get these again. Now, one thing that simplifies this is we have 12 of these written out, and there's really only 3 different of these scales. If you're just playing on a piano or a guitar and just listening blindfolded, the half step, whole step scale, because they're symmetrical, you have one scale that's built on C, A, F sharp, and E flat. Those are the first 4 on page 88. Easy way to remember that is C, A, F sharp, and E flat are the notes in a C diminished 7th or an A diminished 7th or an F sharp diminished or an E flat diminished scale. The notes in the scale all are used to build these scales. Then you have scale 2, which is built on C sharp, B flat, G, and E. And then you have scale 3 on page 89 that's built on D, B, A flat, and F. And we'll get into the fingerings on how to play these scales in a later section. But for now, this is the half-step, whole-step diminished scale, the chords you'd use it against, and how to spell it. Let's flip the page over to page 90, and you see the whole-step, half-step diminished scale. And the same concept here. You really only have 3 different scales. First one, build it on C, A, F sharp, or E flat. Second one is built on C sharp, B flat, G, and E. The third scale is built on page 91 on D, B, A flat, or F. And once you've learned the prior scale, the half step, whole step, then learning the whole step, half step is kind of easy because it's almost like a mode of that scale. It's kind of the same notes. They really are intertwined, engrafted with one another. If you learn one really well, it's going to be really easy to learn the other one. And you're going to start to see these fingering patterns just click. You go, oh, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought. When you first start tackling these, they seem like mind benders, but if you spend some time with them, the complex becomes simple. And I'll just leave it at that. It will become simple as you study these. Now, if we turn to page 92, we have the whole tone scale, which is really a 6-note scale. And every tone in the scale is separated by a whole tone. And we really just have 2 of these scales. One that starts on C, one that starts on C sharp. Because on page 92, the scales you have here, the first staff starts on C, the second one starts on D, third one on E, fourth on F sharp, fifth on G sharp, fifth on B flat. Those are all spelled, they all contain the same notes. They're just starting at different places. They're almost like modes of each other. But because they're symmetrical, because there's a whole step in between every note, there's not much difference in sound. And then you go up a half step on page 93 to the scales that start on C sharp, D sharp, F, G, A, B, same thing. They all contain the same notes. The whole tone scale is used on a dominant chord with a sharp fifth. And this again is one of those scales where I thought, what the heck? Why would you ever use this? But I found some pretty cool licks with this thing. You put it in the right spot in a song. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes you have to search a while, but you will find coolness in every scale in this book if you look deep enough. Now let's go on to page 94 and 95 for the major pentatonic scale. These are pretty simple scales. There's 5 notes in them. Most guitar players are familiar with pentatonic scales. The C pentatonic scale on page 94 is pretty much identical to the A minor pentatonic scale on page 96. Same notes, just different starting point. But again, these pages 94, 95, 96, and 97 show you how to spell the major pentatonic scales and the minor pentatonic scales. And again, as with every spelling in this book, if you look at the bottom of the page, it'll tell you what page to go to later in the book for the fingering patterns that correspond to these spellings. All right, we're to section 5 of the book, page 99, which covers how to spell arpeggios. Now again, an arpeggio is just a chord played one note at a time. For instance, a G major 7 chord, I strummed it, but if I played it one note at a time, that's an arpeggio. Chord, arpeggio. Okay, let's look at page 100 at the diatonic 7 chords that are nested inside major scales. And again, we're using the key of G as an example here. If you took a G major scale, which is spelled out at the top of the page, and let's take the first note, G, I'm looking at the middle of the page now, and we took every other note of that scale, G, B, D, and F sharp. We're just starting at the first note, we're skipping to the third, we're skipping to the fifth, to the seventh. That's G, B, D, F sharp. That spells a G major 7 chord. If we start with the second note in the scale, and we skip every other note, we get A, C, E, G, which spells an A minor 7. Start with the third, skipping every other note, we get B, D, F sharp, A, which is a B minor 7. Start on the fourth, you get C, E, G, B, which spells a C major 7. Start on the fifth degree of the scale, D, you get D, F sharp, A, and C, which spells a D dominant 7. Start on the sixth note of the scale, you get E, G, B, and D, which is an E minor 7. And then you start on the seventh note of the scale, F sharp, skipping every other note. You get F sharp, A, C, and E, which gives you an F sharp minor 7, flat 5, also known as an F sharp half diminished. Okay, so no matter what key you are in, this pattern is going to hold. Look down at that box at the bottom of the page, page 100. Any scale, let's say we're in the key of E, and look at the right-hand column where it says major 7th. You could just put in front of that major 7th an E. If we put the E major scale down that column, you'd have an E major 7th. Second note in an E scale is F sharp, so the second row would be F sharp minor 7th. Third note in an E major scale is G sharp. You'd have G sharp minor 7th. Fourth note in an E scale is A. You'd have A major 7th. Fifth note is B. You'd have a B dominant 7th. Sixth note is C sharp. You'd have a C sharp minor 7th. And the seventh note is D sharp. You'd have a D sharp minor 7 flat 5, also known as a D sharp half diminished. That pattern going from the first row down to the seventh, major 7th, minor 7th, minor 7th, major 7th, dominant 7th, minor 7 flat 5. That will hold with every major scale. So those 15 major scales you memorized at the beginning of the book, you just write them down these rows and you have the diatonic chords that go with those scales. Now I've written all of these out in the appendix. So you go back to the appendix and you'll see the diatonic 7th chords for every key spelled out just like they are here on page 100 for the key of G. Let's go over to page 101 and look at if you wanted to create diatonic 6th chords of the major scale. Same exact principle, except we're grabbing, we'd go G, B, D, E. We're skipping every other note, G, skip a note to B, skip a note to D, then grab the following note, E, which is the 6th. Gives you a G6 note. Use that same principle on the second scale degree, A, you get an A minor 6th. On the third scale degree, you get a B minor flat 6th. On the fourth scale degree, building on a C, you get a C6. On the fifth scale degree, D, you also get a D6. On the sixth scale degree, which is an E, you get an E minor flat 6. On the 7th scale degree, which is F sharp, you get an F sharp flat 6 flat 5 chord. Interesting to know. And again, there's a box on the bottom of page 101 that gives you the same order: major 6, minor flat 6, major 6, minor flat 6, minor flat 6, flat 5. You could spell any of the major scales down, the notes of the major scale down those 7 rows, and it'll give you the diatonic 6 chords nested inside each major scale key. And again, these are all spelled out in the appendix, just for every key, just like they are in the middle of the page here. Let's go over to page 102 for the diatonic 7th chords that are nested inside of a melodic minor scale. Again, we're using the key of G as an example. And I'm going to go a little faster here because it's the exact same principle we just used on the major 7th, on the major scale. And you can see here that the seven 7th chords nested inside a melodic minor scale would be, in the G melodic minor, would be G minor major 7th, A minor 7th, B flat minor 7 sharp 5, C7, D7, E minor 7 flat 5, and F sharp minor 7 flat 5. Now remember that 7th mode of the melodic minor, you could also use every note in that mode as a note for an altered 7th chord. So again, you have the grid down at the bottom of page 102 that shows you the order in which these diatonic chords appear for any melodic minor scale. And again, these are all spelled out in the back of the book, in the appendix, for every one of the melodic minor scales, just like I did for the key of G on this page. If you look at page 103, same principles covered here for the harmonic minor. And the chords we have for the harmonic minor for the first note is, we're looking at the box on the bottom of the page. You got a minor major 7th. Second note gives you a minor 7 flat 5. Building a diatonic 7th chord on the 3rd note gives you a major 7th sharp 5. 4th note, minor 7th. 5th note, dominant 7th. 6th note, major 7th. 7th note is a diminished 7th. And this holds true for every harmonic minor scale, no matter the key. And again, these are spelled out in the back of the book in the appendix. Now, let's look at this next section, several pages here. We're going all the way through to page 131, from 104 to 131. We have the arpeggio spelled out. Page 104 and 105 give you the major 7th. And basically, I'll look at this page here. Go to page 104. At the top here, you got the key of C. And you have this arpeggio spelled out. C, E, G, and B. Those are the 4 notes in a C major 7th arpeggio. I give you 2 octaves of it here. C, E, G, B, then up another octave, C, E, G, B. It shows you below the staff, that's the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th of the chord. And you also see the intervals between the notes that are below that. And then down this page, 104, and on page 105, I've spelled out the major 7th chords for all the different keys. If we go to page 106, same thing there for the major 6th arpeggio. 108 and 109, those pages spell out the dominant 7th chord. Page 110 and 11 spell out the dominant 7 flat 5 chord. Page 112 and 13 spell out the dominant 7 sharp 5 arpeggio. Page 114 and 115 spell out the minor 7th arpeggio. Page 116 and 117 spell out the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. Page 118 and 119 spell out the minor 6th. Next 2 pages, 120 and 121, spell out the minor flat 6th arpeggio. 122 and 123, the minor 6 flat 5 arpeggio. 124 and 125 spell out the minor major 7th arpeggios. 126 and 127, the major 7 sharp 5 arpeggios. Page 128 and 129 spell out the diminished arpeggios. Now look at page 130 and 131. What I've done here is I reviewed all the previous arpeggios, and I've just done it in the key of C, so you can compare how the chord tones are, what chord tones are used to build each one of these. For instance, the C major 7th arpeggio, we use the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th note of a C chord, C major scale. For a C major 6th, if you look below the staff, you see we use the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 6th of the scale to build this chord. For the C dominant 7th, we use the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and flat 7th of the scale to build a C dominant 7th. For C minor 7th, you use the 1st, the flat 3, the 5, and the flat 7 to build that chord. C minor 6th, you use the 1st, the flat 3rd, the 5th, and the 6th. For a C minor flat 6th arpeggio, you use the 1st, the flat 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 6th. For the C minor 7th flat 5 arpeggio, also called the half diminished, use the 1st, the flat 3rd, the flat 5th, and the flat 7th. For the C minor flat 6th flat 5 arpeggio, there's a lot of stuff here. Okay. For this arpeggio, you'd use the 1st, the flat 3rd, the flat 5th, the flat 6th. For the C minor major 7th arpeggio, use the 1st, the flat 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. For the C major 7th sharp 5 arpeggio, use the 1st, the 3rd, the sharp 5, the 7th. For the C diminished 7th arpeggio, use the 1st, flat 3rd, the 5th, and the double flatted 7th. So a double flat, if you're not sure what that is, take a B, you flat it once, it's B flat, you flat it again, it's a B double flat. Really the same thing as an A, but theoretically you'd call it a B double flat. C dominant 7th flat 5, use the 1st, the 3rd, the flat 5, and the flat 7. And finally, the C dominant 7th sharp 5 arpeggio, you use the 1st, the 3rd, the sharp 5, and the 7th to spell that chord.